The Precipice of War. The galaxy was a vast and intricate web of civilizations, each vying for dominance over the stars. At the heart of this cosmic struggle stood Earth, a once isolated world that had, through the relentless march of technology, emerged as a formidable power. Its fleets, equipped with the most advanced propulsion systems and weaponry, patrolled the outer reaches of human-controlled space, while its scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to push the boundaries of what was possible. Yet, for all its progress, Earth was not the only force in the galaxy. Across the void, the Virel, an enigmatic and technologically superior species, watched with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Their empire stretched across the galactic core, a vast network of planets bound by an unshakable hierarchy and an unyielding thirst for expansion. For decades, the two civilizations had maintained a fragile détente, exchanging knowledge and resources in a carefully orchestrated balance of power. But that equilibrium was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The Virel had grown increasingly aggressive, their demands for greater influence in the outer systems met with firm resistance from Earth's governing councils. Diplomacy had failed, and the first skirmishes had already begun, small, isolated conflicts that had gone unnoticed by the wider galaxy. Now, the situation was reaching a breaking point. Intelligence reports from Earth's deep space reconnaissance units painted a grim picture. The Virel were mobilizing their fleets, their warships moving in secret, their intentions clear. A full-scale war was imminent, and the galaxy would soon be drawn into the conflict. The war would not be fought in the traditional sense, with ground troops and territorial conquest. It would be a battle of superior technology, of strategic maneuvering, and of survival in the vacuum of space. The Virel had long possessed the upper hand in terms of energy-based weaponry and artificial intelligence, but Earth had its own advantages, its sheer numbers, its adaptability, and the unrelenting will of its people. The coming conflict would test the limits of both civilizations, forcing them to confront the true cost of war. As Earth's military leaders prepared for the inevitable, the first wave of Virel warships began their descent from the galactic core, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble in anticipation of the battle to come. The commander's burden commander, Elias Varek, stood at the helm of the Aegis, Earth's flagship, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the Virel armada. The war had been a long time coming, but now that it had arrived, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a gravitational field. He had spent years in the service of Earth's military, navigating the corridors of power and the chaos of battle with a calm that few could match. His name was known among the highest ranks of the Earth Defense Forces, a decorated officer whose tactical brilliance had earned him the respect of his peers and the ire of his enemies. Yet, for all his achievements, he had never expected to find himself at the center of a war that would reshape the galaxy. Varek had been born on Mars, a world that had once been a symbol of Earth's ambition, a beacon of human progress. His parents had been scientists, part of the first generation of terraformers who had transformed the red planet into a habitable world. He had grown up in the shadow of their work, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the endless pursuit of knowledge. But even as a child, he had known that Mars was not a place of peace. The planet had always been a frontier, a battleground between the forces of nature and the will of humanity. It was in that crucible that he had learned the value of discipline, of sacrifice, and of the unyielding drive that defined Earth's people. Now, as the war loomed, Varek found himself haunted by the ghosts of his past. He had fought in the early skirmishes, had seen the destruction that the Virel could unleash with their advanced weaponry. He had watched his comrades fall, their bodies reduced to nothing more than ash in the vacuum of Varek find Earth, space. And yet he had not been able to stop it. He had tried, had argued with the High Command, had pleaded for diplomacy, but in the end, the war had been inevitable. Now he stood at the precipice of the greatest battle in human history, and the burden of command rested squarely on his shoulders. He had always believed in Earth's cause, in the right of humanity to stand on its own, to carve out a future among the stars. But as he looked out at the approaching Virel fleet, he could not shake the feeling that this war was not just about survival, it was about something far greater. The Virel were not the mindless aggressors that the propaganda had painted them to be. They were a civilization with their own ambitions, their own fears, their own fears, their own fears upon the stars. But as he looked out at the approaching Virel fleet, he could not shake the feeling that this war was not just about survival. It was about something far greater. The Virel were not the mindless aggressors for fighting. And as the first wave of their warships descended upon the stars, Varek knew that the war was no longer just a battle for Earth's future. It was a test of everything he had ever believed in. The Virel, a civilization of shadows. The Virel were not a species of flesh and blood, but of crystalline structures that pulsed with an eerie luminescence. Their biology was unlike anything found on Earth, a fusion of organic and synthetic elements that allowed them to survive in the harshest environments. Their bodies were composed of a lattice of interwoven mineral formations, capable of withstanding extreme temperatures, radiation, and even the vacuum of space. This adaptation had made them formidable explorers, allowing them to colonize planets that would have been inhospitable to any other known species. Their cities, sprawling across the surfaces of their homeworlds, were not built in the traditional sense, but rather grown from the same crystalline material that formed their bodies, a seamless integration of technology and biology. Their technology was even more advanced than Earth's, a fusion of energy manipulation, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. The Virel had long since abandoned the use of traditional weapons, replacing them with energy-based constructs that could disintegrate enemy ships with a single pulse. Their warships, sleek and unyielding, moved with an eerie grace through space, guided by an artificial intelligence that could predict enemy maneuvers with uncanny precision. Their most feared weapon was the Luminara, a device that could generate a field of pure energy, capable of disintegrating entire fleets in a matter of seconds. It was this technology that had made them a dominant force in the galaxy, and it was the very reason that Earth had finally been forced to prepare for war. Yet, despite their technological superiority, the Virel were not without their own fears and ambitions. They had long viewed Earth as a threat, not because of its military strength, but because of its potential. Earth had grown rapidly, its people unrelenting in their pursuit of knowledge and power. The Virel saw this as a danger, a force that could one day surpass them in every way. They had tried diplomacy, had attempted to establish a balance of power, but Earth's refusal to yield had only deepened their resolve. To them, the war was not just a matter of survival. It was a necessity, a means of ensuring their own continued dominance in the galaxy. For the Virel saw this as a danger, a force that could one day surpass them in every way. They had tried diplomacy, had attempted to establish a balance of power, but Earth's refusal to yield had only deepened their resolve. Of arms, but of ideology. They believed in the supremacy of their way of life, in the harmony of their crystalline existence. To them, Earth was a chaotic, unpredictable force, a species that had yet to fully understand the balance of the universe. And so, as their warships descended upon the stars, they did so not just as conquerors, but as the inevitable force of nature, the one that would shape the future of the galaxy. The first battle. The Aegis trembled as the first Virel warship emerged from the darkness, its crystalline hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. It was a silent predator, moving with a grace that belied the sheer devastation it could unleash. Commander Varek's fingers tightened on the console as the ship's sensors painted a grim picture. The Virel fleet was already in formation, their warships arranged in the deadly arc that encircled Earth's forces. This was no mere skirmish. It was the opening salvo of a full-scale war. "Commander," came the voice of Lieutenant Mara Solon, the Aegis's chief tactical officer, her tone sharp with urgency. "We're being flanked. The Virel have deployed their Sluminara fields. If we don't break their formation, we'll be overwhelmed before we even engage." Varek's mind raced. The Ichael's moaned raced. The Ichael's most feared weapon, a field of pure energy that could disintegrate an entire fleet in seconds. If they allowed the Virel to complete their formation, Earth's forces would be at the mercy of that power. He had no choice. "All ships, prepare for full engagement. We break the formation now." The Ichael's engines roared to life, its thrusters igniting as it surged forward. Around it, the Earth fleet followed, their warships forming a defensive line. The first wave of Virel ships moved in, their weapons already charging. A burst of energy erupted from the lead Virel vessel, a shimmering pulse that lashed out toward the Earth fleet. The Aegis's shields flared as the energy struck, sending a shockwave through the ship. "Shields at 70%, Solon reported, her voice tight. "We need to get closer." Varek's eyes narrowed. They had to get inside the Luminara field's range, where their weapons could reach the Virel before the energy could take effect. He gave the order. A Virel before the energy could take effect. He gave the order. "All ships maneuver to intercept. We go in now." The pulse of plasma fire erupted from the Aegis's main cannon, striking the Aegis's main cannon, striking the eye-book. Virel ship's hull with a searing burst of light. The enemy vessel shuddered, its crystalline structure cracking under the impact. "Hit," Solon confirmed. "But they're not slowing down." The Virel ships retaliated with a barrage of energy lances, their weapons firing in rapid succession. The Aegis's shields flared again, but the damage was undeniable. The ship's hull groaned under the strain. "Commander," Solon said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're taking heavy damage. If we don't break through their formation soon, we won't make it." Varek's jaw clenched. He had no time for hesitation. "All ships, prepare for a full-scale assault! We're going in!" The Aegis and its fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. The battle had begun, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. "The cost of war! As the battle raged on, the full weight of the war's consequences began to take shape. The sheer scale of destruction was staggering. Entire star systems were being reshaped by the clash of two civilizations, each driven by their own vision of the future. Earth's forces had fought with desperation, their weapons firing in a relentless storm of plasma and kinetic rounds. Yet, for all their technological advancements, they were no match for the Virel's Luminara fields, which could disintegrate entire fleets in an instant. The cost of the war was not measured in the number of ships lost, but in the lives that had been taken, the planets that had been reduced to ruin, and the people who had been left to suffer the aftermath of a conflict that neither side had truly prepared for. The ethical dilemmas of the war, in the cores that disintegrate entire fleets in an instant, were inescapable. Earth's military had long adhered to a strict code of conduct, but as the battle continued, the lines between defense and aggression blurred. The Virel had no such moral constraints, their warships striking with ruthless efficiency, their weapons designed to eliminate all opposition without hesitation. Earth's forces, in turn, had begun to adopt more aggressive tactics, deploying weapons that could cause massive collateral damage to civilian populations. The war was no longer just a battle of ships and technology. It was a war of survival, of ideology, and of the will to endure. Yet even as the battle raged, there were those who questioned the necessity of the war. Some among Earth's high command had argued for a more cautious approach, believing that diplomacy, rather than war, was the only path forward. But the Virel had made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. They saw Earth as a threat, a species that could not be trusted, and they were willing to do whatever it took to ensure their own dominance. The war was not just about power, it was about control, about who would shape the future of the galaxy. For the soldiers on both sides, the war was a test of endurance, of belief, and of the choices they had made. Every battle, every sacrifice, every loss was a reminder of the cost of war. And as the first wave of Virel warships pressed forward, the galaxy braced itself for the inevitable, a war that would not end until one side had been utterly destroyed. The crucible of command, Commander Elias Varek, stood at the center of the agency's command deck, his mind a battlefield of its own. The war had already taken its toll, and now, as the Virel fleet pressed forward, he faced the most difficult decision of his life. The agency and its fleet were outmatched, their weapons struggling to penetrate the Virel's Luminara fields. If they continued their current course, they would be annihilated. But if they retreated, if they allowed the Virel to take the initiative, Earth's forces would be pushed back, and the war would be lost before it even began. His fingers hovered over the console, the weight of command pressing down on him like a gravitational field. He had spent years preparing for this moment, training his officers, studying the Virel's tactics, and anticipating every possible outcome. And yet no amount of preparation could have prepared him for the sheer magnitude of the decision of eyes that lay before him. He had always believed in Earth's cause, in the right of humanity to stand on its own. But now, as he looked out at the enemy fleet, he could not shake the feeling that this war was not just about survival. It was about something far greater. The Virel were not the mindless aggressors that the propaganda had painted them to be. They were a civilization with their own fears, their own ambitions, their own reasons for fighting. And as he watched the Columinaris field expand, consuming entire sections of the battlefield, he could not help but wonder if there was a way to avoid the destruction that was coming. He turned to Lieutenant Solon, her face pale under the flickering lights of the command deck. "We can't hold this position," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "If we stay here, we'll be wiped out." Solon's eyes flicked to the tactical display, her expression grim. "We don't have time to retreat. The Varek are closing in." Varek clenched his jaw. He had no choice. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it now. His mind raced through the possibilities. A full retreat would be catastrophic, but a calculated withdrawal might still leave Earth's forces in a position to regroup and strike back. It was a gamble, but it was the only option he had. He turned back to the console, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "All ships, prepare for a tactical withdrawal. We're not abandoning the battlefield, but we're not staying here to be destroyed." Its thrusters igniting as it surged backward. Around it, the Earth fleet followed, their warships maneuvering in a coordinated retreat. The Virel, sensing the shift, pressed forward, their weapons firing in a relentless storm of energy. "Commander," Solon said, her voice tight with urgency, "they're not letting us go that easily." Varek's eyes narrowed. He had made his decision. Now, all that remained was to see if it was the right one. The escalation of conflict. The retreat of Earth's forces was only the beginning. The Virel, having sensed a moment of hesitation, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Their Luminara field surged forward, consuming the retreating Earth fleet in a wave of pure energy. The Aegis cut, and its surviving warships barely managed to escape the worst of the destruction, but the damage was undeniable. Entire squadrons had been obliterated, the wreckage drifting through the void like the remnants of a shattered dream. Commander Varek's mind was a battlefield of its own as he assessed the situation. They had lost too much, and the Virel were not going to stop now. The war had escalated beyond a mere clash of fleets. It had become a war of annihilation. Earth's forces had been forced to adopt more aggressive tactics, deploying experimental weapons that had been kept in reserve for just such an occasion. The agency's weapons systems now fired not only plasma rounds, but also quantum destabilizers, devices that could disrupt the crystalline structure of the Virel's warships, rendering them vulnerable for the first time. Yet even with these new weapons, the war was not going in Earth's favor. The Virel had adapted quickly, their artificial intelligence evolving. The Aegis's weapons systems now fired not only plasma rounds, but also quantum destabilizers, devices that could disrupt the crystalline structure of the Virel's warships in real time to counter the new threats. Their warships had begun to deploy countermeasures, energy shields that could absorb the quantum destabilizers and redirect their energy back at the attackers. The battle had become a war of attrition, each side fighting for every inch of space, for every moment of survival. As the war raged on, the stakes grew ever higher. Earth's high command had no choice but to expand their efforts, sending additional fleets from distant colonies to reinforce the front lines. The once isolated worlds of humanity, from the ice-crusted moons of Saturn to the arid plains of Mars, had been drawn into the conflict. The war was no longer just a battle for Earth's survival, it was a war for the entire human race. But the Virel were not the only ones with ambitions. Of the galaxy, a third power had begun to take notice. The Zelari, an enigmatic species that had long remained hidden from the galactic powers, had watched the war with growing interest. Their technology was unlike anything seen before, a fusion of organic and synthetic elements that allowed them to manipulate the very fabric of space. They had remained neutral for centuries, but now, as the war escalated, they saw an opportunity. The Zelari had long been wary of both Earth and the Virel, but they had never been able to match their technological prowess. Now, as the war threatened to consume the galaxy, they saw a chance to tip the balance in their favor. They had begun to make contact with Earth's forces, offering their assistance in exchange for a promise of future cooperation. But the Virel, too, had caught wind of the Zelari's movements. They had sent their own emissaries, offering their own version of an alliance, one that would ensure the Virel's continued dominance. The war had become more than a battle of fleets and weapons. It was a war of alliances, of betrayals, of shifting loyalties. And as the galaxy braced itself for the next phase of the conflict, the question remained, who would emerge victorious, and at what cost? The turning point. The war had reached its breaking point, and the galaxy teetered on the edge of annihilation. Earth's forces had been pushed back to the outermost reaches of human-controlled space, their once formidable fleets now a battered and dwindling force. The Virel, emboldened by their early victories, had begun their advance into the inner systems, their Alnumenara fields consuming entire planetary defenses in a matter of seconds. The Zelari, ever the opportunists, had made their move, offering their advanced technology to both sides in exchange for influence. But the war had become more than a battle of fleets. It was a war of ideologies, of survival, and of the will to endure. Commander Elias Varek stood at the helm of the Aegiacious, his mind a storm of calculations and possibilities. The war had taken its toll, and he knew that if they did not act now, Earth would be lost. The Virel had grown too strong, their artificial intelligence evolving faster than Earth's own. Their weapons had adapted to every countermeasure, and their fleet had expanded beyond the limits of even the most advanced Earth projections. But Varek had not given up. He had seen the war from the beginning, had watched the destruction unfold, and he had made a decision that would change the course of history. "We have one chance," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We need to strike at the heart of the Virel's command. If we destroy their central intelligence, we can cripple their ability to coordinate their attacks. It's the only way." Lieutenant Solin's eyes widened. "That's impossible, Commander. Their central intelligence is protected by layers of artificial defense. We'd be walking into a death trap." Varek exhaled sharply. "Then we do it with the Zelari." The Zelari had been watching the war from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to tip the balance. They had offered their assistance to Earth, but only under one condition, that the war be ended before it consumed the galaxy. Now, their central intelligence is protected by layers of artificial defense. With the Virel at their doorstep, they had no choice but to act. Their technology, a fusion of organic and synthetic elements, allowed them to manipulate the very fabric of space. They could create barriers, distort gravity, and even rewrite the laws of physics themselves. The plan was audacious. The Aegisy and a small fleet of Earth's most elite warships would be accompanied by auxiliary strike force, their ships cloaked in an energy field that made them invisible to the Virel's sensors. They would infiltrate the Virel's central command, a massive crystalline structure that housed their artificial intelligence. Once inside, they would deploy the Zelari's most advanced weapon, the Eclipse, a device capable of severing the Virel's central intelligence from the rest of their network. As the Aegisy and its fleet moved into position, the tension in the command deck was palpable. Every officer knew the risks. If the mission failed, they would be destroyed. But if it succeeded, the Virel's dominance would be broken, and Earth would finally have a chance to reclaim its place in the galaxy. The Zalari ships emerged from the void, their forms shifting as they moved in perfect unison. The Agashi followed, its engines humming as it closed the distance. The Virel's forces had no idea what was coming. The Zalari's energy barriers surged forward, distorting the battlefield as they moved into position. The Agashi's weapons fired, their plasma rounds striking the Virel's defenses with devastating precision. The battle had begun in earnest, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But the galaxy was forever changed. The Virel's central intelligence had been severed, their command structure shattered by the Zalari's Eclipse weapon. In the aftermath, the once unstoppable empire had collapsed into chaos, its warships scattered, its artificial intelligence in disarray. Earth's forces had emerged victorious, but the cost had been staggering. Entire star systems had been reduced to ruin, their planets scarred by the relentless war. The people who had once lived in peace now found themselves in the grip of a new reality, one shaped by destruction, loss, and the weight of history. Commander Elias Varek stood on the observation deck of the Aegis, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the wreckage of the battle. The war had tested him in ways he had never imagined, had forced him to make decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had seen the best and worst of humanity, had watched as his fellow soldiers fought with unyielding determination, only to be consumed by the very conflict they had sought to end. And yet, despite the devastation, despite the loss, he had not allowed himself to be consumed by despair. He had made a choice, and that choice had changed the course of history. The Zalari had not remained in the shadows. Their presence had been undeniable, and now, with the war over, they had made their move. They had offered Earth a new path, one that did not involve the destruction of the Virel, but rather the creation of a new order, one that would ensure peace for the galaxy. The Virel, though broken, had not been completely destroyed. Their people had survived, and now, with the war over, their presence had been undeniable, and now, with the war over, their presence had not remained, and now. They faced a future that was uncertain. Some among them had called for retribution, for the destruction of Earth and the Zalari alike. Others had spoken of peace, of a future where the Virel could coexist with the other civilizations of the galaxy. The war had not been a simple victory or defeat. It had been a battle for the very soul of the galaxy, for the right to define the future. And now, as the dust settled, as the remnants of the war gathered themselves, the galaxy stood on the precipice of a new era. The Virel, Earth, and the Zalari would have to find a way to move forward, to build a future that did not repeat the mistakes of the past. Varek knew that the war had changed him. Conflict, had felt the weight of command, and had made the decisions that had shaped the outcome. He had not fought for conquest, but for survival, for the right of humanity to stand among the stars. And as he looked out at the vast expanse of space, he knew that the war was over, but the struggle for peace had only just begun. The legacy of war. The war had not only shaped the galaxy, it had reshaped the very nature of its civilizations. The Virel, once an unshakable force of order and dominance, had been humbled by the combined might of Earth and the Zalari. Their empire, though not entirely destroyed, had been irrevocably altered. The collapse of their central intelligence had left them fractured, their once unified command structure reduced to a collection of isolated factions, each vying for control over the remnants of their once mighty empire. Some had sought vengeance, others had turned to diplomacy, but all had been forced to confront the reality that the war had changed them forever. For Earth, the victory had come at a great cost. The war had tested the limits of human endurance, had forced its people to confront the horrors of interstellar conflict in ways that no previous generation had ever imagined. The destruction of entire planets, the loss of millions of lives, the scars left upon the fabric of human society. These were not things that could be erased with a single treaty or a moment of peace. The war had left its mark on every corner of the galaxy, and the question that remained was whether the lessons of this conflict would be heeded in the future. The Zalari, ever the enigmatic observers, had played their part in the war with calculated precision. They had not entered the conflict as conquerors, nor as saviors, but as the unseen force that had tipped the balance in favor of peace. Their technology, their knowledge of the cosmos, their ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality, these had been the tools that had allowed the war to end. And now, as the galaxy stood on the precipice of a new era, the Zalari had made their choice. They would not remain in the shadows. They would shape the future of the galaxy, not through conquest, but through cooperation. For Varek, the war had been a crucible, a test of his beliefs, his strength, and his will. He had fought not for glory, but for survival, for the right of humanity to stand among the stars. And now, as he looked out at the vast expanse of space, He knew that the war was over, but the struggle for peace had only just begun. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.